Hello everybody, welcome to this webinar session or videotaping session called Formulating Strategy. Again, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be there to be with you this past Monday night. However, I do think that this will be at least a good option for us to convey the material. This is one of my favorite sessions because it really gets at something a little bit different than what we're doing for the most part in the class. If you remember, we talked on the first night about relevant significance of certain managerial skills. And so, for example, if we move from left to right here in the left-hand column, so to speak, are the skills needed to be a good first-line supervisor. In the middle column, the skills needed, relative skills needed to be a good middle manager, and on the far right, senior management. And you notice that the technical skills become increasing less important as you move up the ranks, while the conceptual skills become more and more important as you move up in the ranks hierarchically towards senior management. We've been focusing most of our class sessions, as you know, on the human factor, which remains constant throughout your experiences in managing. So, for example, we talked on the first day about Eric Peterson and the fact that Eric Peterson needed to be more of a visionary as a leader, and as a manager needed to have a clear plan in place for meeting the turn-on date, and in general needed to have some skills that he had not honed as of yet, including the ability to deal with conflict head-on, to build key relationships with people inside and outside the organization, and generally recognize the interdependence of working with other people. We, in our second and third class, talked about leading and launching teams through the vehicles of Henry Tam, the team that wasn't optional reading, the Carter Racing case, which showed you the downside of team decision making and the importance of managing the process to encourage healthy conflict, for example, in the appraisal of alternatives, multiple alternatives. So the strategic piece of management, from my perspective, largely it fits into this conceptual umbrella here, in that as you move towards the senior ranks in an organization, you're going to need to understand the competitive landscape within which an organization operates, as well as other forces facing the organization, how well the company or organization is strategizing to meet its various customer needs, etc. And so that is why the inclusion of the Formulating Strategy session. So in terms of what I'll be doing over the next probably hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half, we'll be discussing the articles in general, and we're also going to integrate them within the context of the Apple case, because as you can imagine, both articles can be applied, both of the main articles, that is what is strategy and five forces, can be applied very well to the Apple case. And I will review in relative brief fashion the optional readings. That is the Queen's and McCall's respective strategic initiatives, as well as the 7S model, which is a popular framework that's used frequently as well, and something that you should be aware of. Okay, so in terms of strategic management, what the heck is it? Strategic management consists of the analyses, decisions, and actions a company undertakes in order to create and sustain competitive advantages. So, for example, I put in parentheses, what industries should we compete in? Technically, the five forces model can help you even think about that issue, as can the What is Strategy article, because you would need to consider, do we have the organizational capability to move into different industries? The bolded competitive advantages is one of those critical terms used in strategy, and it was probably coined by a number of different folks, but really brought to life by Michael Porter, who is considered to be a relative very prolific researcher in this area, and somebody who's made a very big practical he's had a very strong influence on practice. And so, as you know, the notion of a competitive advantage is a very a difficult to imitate resource asset set of activities that an organization undertakes, and that helps it to garner profits, and in the case of nonprofits, to better meet its constituencies' needs. Now, there are three elements here. The process, the process of strategic management includes analysis, that is, of your goals, including the vision, mission, and objectives, the actual strategic formulation and implementation of it. We are going to do a case later in the class involving strategic planning. This really gets more down to the analytical piece. That is the external and internal environment that an organization faces at the onset and throughout its existence as it considers various forces influencing it. And as an early introduction, the 5 forces model is very, very clearly fits with the external environment in terms of helping to analyze things like the supplier base, the customers, other competitors, the competitors, and the 7S model, the optional reading, is very good at helping you to understand the internal environment. That is an alignment between the organization's strategies and the other S's, including things like staffing, shared values, structure, because you need to continue to keep those aligned internally as you face strategic challenges. Formulation involves actual strategies to meet for example, a grand strategy or corporate level strategy, or a vision, which we're not really talking very much about this evening, I'm talking this evening. And then you have your implementation of it. That involves organization design, strategic leadership, and change programs. And to be sure, we are going to actually engage one evening in an organizational change simulation that involves a company that has reconsidered its strategy and is now trying to move to implement that for the betterment of the company. Now, what we'll discuss specifically, the Apple case, Porter, and the readings, just a few general comments, what strategy is, the generic strategies that have arisen from Porter's work, competitive advantage and industry analyses as complementary frameworks, and to be sure, just to give you an early entree to that, one of the big outcomes, so to speak, or concepts that has been derived from that What is Strategy article is really that notion of competitive advantage, and the idea that the key to being a successful organization is to have competitive advantages, that is, key resources and assets, as the source of profitability. And then the industry analysis can be considered, the 5 forces framework is really complementary in that you think about what's going on in the industry as something to consider. So it's both looking outside and inside the organization. And again, the 7S framework, and if I think we have time, just a few brief comments about the Queen's strategic plan. Now, in terms of the Porter and the readings, I'd like to make a few comments there. The Michael Porter is a name that you don't want to leave a class like this one without knowing. Michael Porter is a Harvard business professor, a very strong consultant, and he really has focused his career on strategic management, but with a real focus on competition. And so he has looked at, these 2 articles are considered absolutely key foundational reading for understanding strategy. And so he's looked at the level of analysis as the organization, or that is the competitive advantages within an organization. He's looked at industry structure, that is the 5 forces. He's looked at why nations are competitive. He's also looked at how corporate social responsibility can be a competitive advantage. And he's even more recently delved into examining healthcare as something to be considered. solvable from his perspective, or, an area that he would like to make a contribution to. So he wrote a 1985 book called Competitive Advantage, in which he really details a lot of what is in these two articles. So if you ever wanted to read them, they're critical. Again, if you take away almost really one name in strategic management, it would be Porter. Now, to go a little bit further into the What is Strategy article, the notion, as you know, there are some key things that I want you to take away from this. And it starts with an understanding of operational effectiveness as a necessary but not sufficient condition, and for outstanding performance, and the idea that it's not strategy. So in the article, it reads that OE means performing similar activities than in comparison to your rivals, and doing them actually better. So for example, better utilization of inputs by reducing defects in products, or developing products faster by employing better technology, motivating people better. And my examples are drawn directly from his article, to be sure. And the operational effectiveness happens is through, it's basically like mimicry. You are copying what other organizations do for essentially best practices. So, and for being better able to perform activities that everybody else is doing, but just doing them more efficiently. So things like outsourcing. As you know, a lot of companies outsource. A lot of companies have engaged in total quality management programs like Six Sigma, or just-in-time inventory, or benchmarking best practices. And all of this is good, but Porter says that's not really what makes someone different or makes for a strategy. For Porter, the way to accrue profits is by performing different activities and doing them in different ways, in ways that are reinforcing and optimizing, and are frankly very difficult to copy. And the article highlights, for example, how Continental tried to copy Southwest strategy and failed to do so because it was not as simple as it seemed to straddle, so to speak, which is a term that he uses in the article. And so Continental tried to straddle its traditional strategy in servicing the broad needs of a lot of flyers, and also going into this low-cost segment that Southwest was serving. And specifically, Southwest was trying to meet the needs of convenience-oriented and price-sensitive customers. And Continental thought, okay, well, why can't we do this? And so they tried to undertake both strategies, but it didn't work. And for one, as you know, Porter talks a bit about how it's necessary to consider trade-offs. So he uses the example of Neutrogena soap, and the idea that it is medicinal rather than, for example, deodorizing. So, once you choose one strategy, you have to sacrifice what you don't want to do. And, he gives a number of reasons for that, including, for example, if you're trying to do too many things, like if you were trying to be a differentiator and a low-cost provider, what does that signal about your image? So for example, what if Mercedes has these very high-end products and then, or cars, and then decides to introduce a very low-end car? What does that do to the image of Mercedes, when we know that a lot of the reason people buy Mercedes is because of the image that it conveys? So Porter says you've got to think as much about what you're not going to do as what you are actually going to do. And I'll stop here and start my next video shortly.